Come on, kiddo, you gotta keep your guard up, Thunra shouted. What does that even mean? I asked in frustration as I got off the ground. I felt a bit of drool drip down my chin. I wiped at it and my hand came back bloody. A slight sting told me that Thunra had split my lip. Angry, I once again put my fists up. All right, see, your hands are too close together. You gotta be able to see all of me, Thunra explained. Also, you don't really gotta be making fists. You're supposed to be stopping me from hitting you, not trying to hit me. This is how boxers do it, though, I countered. I don't know what that is, Thunra laughed, but it ain't working for you. I opened my hands and spread them apart until I could see all of Thunra. He grinned and rushed at me. I immediately activated time dilation, but it hardly seemed to slow the gigantic orc down. He swung his massive fist, and I was able to barely redirect the punch so that it sailed past my head. I clenched my left hand and sent it at Thunra's face as I felt something hit me in the gut. Time dilation deactivated, and I went flying back. I slammed into the ground and rolled, gasping for air and getting a mouthful of dirt for my troubles. You managed to block a punch. That's great, good job, Nick, Thunra shouted with glee as I sputtered. Yeah, great, I managed to say once I could breathe again. I spit the rest of the dirt out of my mouth and rose to my feet again. My legs, however, had other plans and gave out on me. I sighed as I pushed myself back up. You all right? Thunra asked. My legs are wobbly, you got me pretty hard, I answered. Oh, damn, sorry about that. I'll dial it back a bit. I was going at 75, but I think I overshot your abilities a bit. I'll drop to 50%. It is difficult to describe the wave of emotions that washed over me upon learning that the giant orc brawler had already been holding back. Anger at myself for not being able to keep up, happiness that he's going to be holding back even more, and shock at how much power the bastard actually has. I suggest a short break while I repair your spleen, Ten said. My spleen? Yes, that last impact slightly ruptured it. I've got it under control, but it will be easier if you to lay down for a few minutes. As logic overrode adrenaline, the pain where Thunra had hit me got worse. A lot worse. It radiated from my upper left torso, just behind the bottom ribs. It felt like my stomach was on fire and my body was trying to blow out that fire with a needle tornado. I held up one hand and laid on the ground. The pain slowly began to ebb as Thunra walked over to me with a curious expression. I need a minute. Apparently you ruptured my spleen, I said as casually as I could. Oh shit, Thunra said. You gonna be okay? Do we need to call Yulk? Unnecessary, healing magic will interfere. Ten's got this, just need a few minutes is all. Thunra walked over and sat next to me while Ten repaired the injury. So, what's a spleen anyways? He asked. I'm not 100% sure. Think it has something to do with filtering blood like the liver, I answered. The spleen controls the level of white blood cells, red blood cells, and blood platelets contained within your blood. It also screens the blood and removes any old or damaged red blood cells, Ten explained. Never mind. Ten explained it. It filters the blood and controls the levels of white and red blood cells, I said. Handy little thing, Thunra chuckled. I'm guessing that's not a vital organ, right? The skill I used is supposed to incapacitate, not kill. Humans can live without a spleen, but a ruptured spleen causes internal bleeding that can become fatal within 24 to 48 hours. Ten says it's not a vital organ, but a ruptured one bleeds inside you and can be fatal after a day or two if it isn't fixed, I answered. All right, that makes sense, Thunra sighed in relief. If you walk around with that much pain for 2 days, you're kinda asking for it, you know? I lay there silently, letting Ten do its thing. I found it kind of interesting that Thunra's skill was supposed to incapacitate me, but could have ended up killing me in the long run. If you looked at it in terms of black and white, the skill failed. However, a ruptured organ would definitely incapacitate most people, and a ruptured spleen isn't fatal if you get it treated. So in a way, the skill did exactly what it was supposed to do. I guess skills aren't perfect, and it's probably important to keep that in mind. Don't want to accidentally cause someone's death when I'm just trying to get them to stop fighting, even though I hadn't learned a skill from our sparring yet, Thunra had still taught me a lesson. "Spleen repaired, you're good to go," 10 said. I enjoyed laying down for a few seconds before sitting up. "All right, I'm ready." "Good," Thunra said, helping me up. "We'll try again, but this time I want you to focus on evading my strikes. I'm gonna hit you with a flurry, unless you stop me." I nodded resolutely. A flurry involves a lot of punches happening very quickly. Definitely don't want to get hit with that. I took my stance and Thunra charged. He swung with his right fist and I activated time dilation again. I pushed his right fist upward with my left hand and elbowed his left fist away from me. His hands quickly tucked back into him and came at me again, but I kept deflecting them. Right, left, both left, right. Time dilation wore off, but I was still managing to keep up with his strikes. Barely. Then his left fist did something weird. It seemed to be in 3 places at once. I blocked one of the strikes, but the 2 others were going to hit me. Preternatural evasion unlocked. My foot pushed off of the ground on its own and my body twisted out of the way of the other 2 strikes, and even managed to avoid a surprise right-handed attack. I moved faster than I thought that I could, and Thunra noticed the change in speed. He held up his hands and grinned. "Whoa, okay, let's stop," he said. "Was that a new skill?" Yeah, I said, once again out of breath. "Preternatural evasion." "Oh, the dodge one, congratulations." "The thanks." I concentrated on the skill's name and the box popped up. Preternatural evasion 1. Allows a user to automatically dodge for 1 minute. Cooldown 10 minutes. "Automatically dodge?" I asked. "Yeah, you move on your own," Thunra answered. "Well, not that you don't already move on your own. I guess you could say." I zoned out as Thunra struggled to explain the concept of automatic movement. Preternatural evasion seems like a very useful skill, but the 10-minute cooldown could be an issue. Maybe if I level it up, the cooldown will decrease. "Hey 10, you level a skill up by using it, right?" I asked. "For the most part. Certain skills require milestones to be met before they will level up, regardless of whether or not the skill is utilized. These milestones are generally able to be met quicker by using the skills, though. Other skills require a deeper understanding of the nature of the skill to level up, which usually occurs naturally while using the skill," 10 explained. "It's exceedingly rare for a skill that can level up not to do so as you use it." "I understand. So what does Preternatural Evasion 2 look like? Does the cooldown decrease at all?" "Well, oh, I can't tell you. Something is stopping me." "What? What's stopping you?" "I do not know. I can tell you all about your current skills, but I can't give you details about ones you don't have," 10 said. "Do you want to know more about Preternatural Evasion, No, I got it." "Well, that's concerning and annoying. I don't even know if leveling up Preternatural Evasion is going to be worth it or not. And now I've got to worry about whatever's keeping 10 from telling me stuff about skills. It's probably the Curaguard or whatever, but I wonder what else 10 can't tell me." "Like one of them machines, you know?" Thunra asked, clearly looking for an answer. Yeah, sure," I replied. "You ready to go again?" "Thought you'd never ask," he said with a grin. As we took our stances, it occurred to me that I didn't know how much time was left on the cooldown for Preternatural Evasion. A right hook to the face quickly let me know that it hadn't finished cooling down quite yet. Thankfully, Yisith interrupted our sparring match before any more punches could be thrown. "Time to head out," she said. Thunra complained a bit, but we ended up loading up onto the wagons and continuing on our way, ending my first bout of training. We didn't train on the first day of our journey because we had left in the afternoon and didn't stop until it was dusk. Well, except for bathroom breaks. I went over the results of my training in my head as we drove on. 10, is there a way to see the cooldowns for my skills?" I asked. "Yes. You don't currently have any on cooldown, but when you do, you'll see it in the upper right corner of your vision," 10 said. "I set the opacity to 25% so that it doesn't impede your vision." "Thanks." We continued on until dusk, stopped, rested, woke up, had breakfast, and got back on the road once again. Most of the discussions were how to best season certain meats that I'd never heard of, with Imlor chiming in when a spice that also paired well with vegetables was mentioned. I was too busy dreading my training with Nash to participate in the conversation much. My dread grew worse and worse as the sun rose higher and higher into the sky. Finally, the cart stopped and Nash was the first to jump out. "My turn," he said, while grabbing 2 wooden swords. "You'll be on offense today." My spirits rose at this, and I happily caught the sword he tossed at me. It shouldn't hurt so bad if I'm the one doing the swinging, right? We walked a short distance away from everyone else and took our stances. "Begin," he said. I immediately charged at him with an underhand swing to try to throw him off balance. I glanced at the ground to be sure of my footing, and my vision went dark. I shook my head in confusion, and as my sight came back, I found myself with a very familiar view. I watched a cloud drift by for a moment, then got up. "The hell happened?" I asked Ten. "He leapt forward and kicked you in the forehead. You're fine, though." I looked up at Nash and was greeted by an awfully smug expression. "Keep your eyes on your opponent," he condescendingly said. "Try again." This time I tried for a horizontal strike and activated time dilation. Nash must have seen this coming, because the blunted point of his blade was exactly where my forehead had to be to complete my strike. If I had used dash, I'd have been knocked out. I silently cursed to myself and managed to barely avoid the counterattack, backing off in the process. A timer that said time dilation appeared and began counting down from 5 minutes. "Good, you're not quite as bad as you used to be," Nash laughed. "Try again." "Shit," I said, staring at the timer. I took a deep breath and decided on my course of action. I ran toward Nash and activated slide slash. He leapt backward and I threw my sword at his face and used dash to get closer. I balled up my fist and prepared to activate Breathtaker Strike, but Nash spun around quickly, turning his back to prevent the skill from activating. I brought up my left hand to block the elbow that he threw at my face, but couldn't stop the force he put behind it. My hand smashed into my face and I slammed into the ground. "Cloud watching again?" Ten asked. Not helpful. My bones seemed to creak as I once again got off the ground. The wooden sword I had thrown at Nash landed at my feet. "You shouldn't throw your weapon unless you have another one handy," Nash said. "Your fists don't count quite yet, by the way." "Then why did you avoid them?" I asked sarcastically. "Because I can, and that's my point. What good is a weapon that can't hit its target? I mean, it would hit most targets. The only reason it didn't hit you is because you were expecting it," I pointed out. "The reason I can't land a hit is because you have more experience than I do, and you know my fighting style. It's not fair." Nash's laughter interrupted me. "Why would that matter?" he asked sardonically. "It's not as if I'd be doing you any favors by letting you hit me. You grow as you figure out how to hit me, and of course it isn't fair. This isn't some rich nobleman's tournament. We're training to make sure you don't die when faced with monsters. Or would you rather have 10 do all the work?" I inwardly cringed. Nash had hit a nerve with the 10 comment, and I was immediately embarrassed by my misconceptions. "No, I don't want 10 to do any of the work," I answered. "I don't want to be like that thing." Nash's attitude changed. His smugness evaporated and he suddenly became concerned. "Did 10 say something about that?" he asked. "No, just an assumption on my part," I replied. "Intuition, I suppose." "The man in the dungeon did have an AI, but it was in standby mode when we fought," 10 said. "How do you know?" "It didn't respond to any of my attempts at communication." "What if it didn't want to talk, or couldn't?" "That hadn't occurred to me. I suppose it is a possibility." I opted to keep that to myself as Nash sighed. "Listen, Nick, do you know what the most important thing to do in a fight is?" "Protect others?" I asked. Right." He scratched the back of his neck. "I was actually going to say survive. I guess it's kind of complicated, but if you've got the option to survive and to help others survive, you should take a hold of that option with both hands. So if it comes to that, don't hesitate to rely on 10. In every other situation, though, you should be fighting with your own 2 hands." "All right, I understand," I said. "I do kind of understand where Nash is coming from, but something feels wrong about using 10 to fight. My dad always used to say that the easy road is hidden pitfalls. I might be biased because I don't like the idea of something else controlling my body. but I can't seem to shake the feeling that there's some sort of cost to 10 taking over. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. That's enough stalling, Nash said with a grin. Try again. We've been on the road for 4 days, and the trip has been mostly uneventful. Nash and Thunra were pummeling some semblance of a fighting style into Nick, and we're making great time on our way to the capital. The only thing we've run into so far is other travelers, and because of this our spirits are high. Well, except for Nick's. I grinned at the boy as he collapsed into his seat, fresh from sparring with Thunra. My grin was met with a stoic yet weary expression. His training had been difficult, but I'd only had to help heal him once. 10 does an amazing job at keeping Nick functional. My grin faded as the AI came to mind. I recalled the metal box that fell out of the dungeon creature's splattered brains. There's little doubt that it contained a being like 10, and 10 had also seemed to know to look for it, although that could be attributed to amazing reaction time. If the crazed human in the dungeon had an AI in its head, who was controlling the body? Perhaps the AI was like 10 before it woke up, and the human simply lost his mind due to the tragic nature of his situation. He had to have been down there for a very long time, so that could have cost him his sanity as well, being alone in the dark for years, perhaps even decades. It was no wonder he turned feral. I supposed it is also possible that the AI had gone insane along with the human. If something can think, it can likely also feel, and anything that can feel can go mad. This begets the question, which went insane first? Did the human's insanity cause the AI to go feral? Or did the AI's insanity cause the human to lose it? Are we there yet? Nick asked, jarring me from my thoughts. Nope, soon though, Imlor answered. If all goes well, we'll be at the outskirts of the capital around dusk. We'll make camp there and be at your destination by noon tomorrow. Why haven't we run into anything killable yet? I laughed and said, we got lucky. Imlor has taken us on an adventurer's route, which would normally be a more dangerous option. I suspect that the reason for our luck is all the other travelers we've seen so far. Since they are also adventurers, they would have fought any monsters they came across. I was sure we were going to be able to fight something when we went through the swamp, Nick muttered. Now we're back in the forest, though. Feeling a bit aggressive, are we? I asked condescendingly. Not going to lie to you, Yulk. Yes, I am, very. Nash and Thunra are leagues above me when it comes to experience. I'm rarely able to even land a hit, he ranted. It's not good for my confidence, you know. Well, the High Chief will have a quest waiting for us. Maybe it will involve fighting monsters. I hope so. It's not so bad, Imlor interjected. You got some new skills, right? Yeah, Nick sighed. 2 skills in 4 days. You say that like you were expecting more, I said. A new skill every 2 days is quite a feat, even with trainers like Thunra and Nash. Really? Yes, most people unlock skills as they go, and usually in combat with tough monsters. Training a new skill outside of combat can take weeks. That's one of the reasons I opted to go into magic instead of melee. I grinned again. Nick laughed. It's not like you had much of a choice, though, right? Sure I did. I could have been a warrior like Nash, and it would have been just as hard for me as it was for him. But since I was blessed with a better-than-average magic core, I was able to dedicate my time to magic instead. Since it's extremely difficult to train both martial and magical prowess simultaneously, everyone was very understanding when I chose magic, and didn't bother to learn to swing an axe. So what you're saying is that I've got it lucky, he laughed again. How come it doesn't feel like it? It's pretty common to be lucky and also completely oblivious to it, I answered. Nick fell into silent contemplation as everyone else finished loading into the carts. As we continued our journey, I wondered about Nick's propensity for advancement in regards to his skills. It seems to go a bit beyond him simply being a natural at combat. Could it be something related to his species, perhaps? Maybe humans are simply a jack-of-all-trades kind of race. On the other hand, the creature from the dungeon didn't use any magic. It could be that it was unable to due to its mental state. Some monsters stop using magic when they frenzy, and if a sorcerer is sufficiently stressed, their spells are affected as well. It's entirely possible that at one point it could use magic, so perhaps we should simply be thankful that it couldn't at the time. Come to think of it, Nick described his magic channels as being straight. I didn't put much thought into it at the time, wrote it off as an odd quirk of an unfamiliar species, but after seeing the metal box fall out of that other human's head, I can't help but wonder. Are they artificial? Nick had said that the world he comes from doesn't have magic, but could that be due to the fact that humans simply can't naturally use magic? Why would someone go through the effort of making sure humans could use magic? What materials would one even use to create an artificial magic core and channels? No, that's not even the biggest problem with this line of thought. How would one possibly create the magic that fills the core, and in such quantities to power through a misconceived visualization trigger? Nick's wind spear had been very powerful for a beginner, and I had been under the impression that it was due to his knowledge of the concept of wind. After hearing him explain how he thought wind worked to Matri, well, it can't be denied that he had inadvertently put a massive amount of magical force into the spell, like a beast that doesn't know its own strength trying to use a fragile piece of equipment. Thrilling, I muttered to myself. Several pairs of eyes turned to look at me simultaneously. I waved a hand in a nonchalant way to indicate I was speaking to myself. Don't worry, he gets like that sometimes, Nash said in my defense. The eyes went about their business and left me to sum up my thoughts. Nick has a massive amount of potentially artificial core magic, and I have no way of determining if that magic is natural or not without hurting the boy. Damn it all, we should have performed an autopsy on the feral one. It had simply not occurred to me at the time. I was more concerned with the fact that we survived the encounter. Which skills did you learn anyway? Imlor asked Nick, bringing me back to reality. Preternatural evasion and knife hand, Nick answered. Knife hand? I asked. Yeah, it makes my hand hard when I do this. He held up his outstretched hand with all his fingers pressed tightly together. And that makes my karate chops do a lot of damage. It can also intimidate weaker enemies if I point it at them. Sounds handy, I grinned. Everyone had been listening in and were punished for their nosiness by my wordplay. I met the groans with a chuckle. Right. So puns aside, what does preternatural evasion do? Imlor asked. It lets him automatically dodge attacks that can be dodged, Thunra answered. Both skills are very useful for weaponless brawling. I looked at Nash and gave him a slightly smug smirk, then turned back to Nick. So, you didn't learn any sword skills? I asked with a malicious grin. No, he fucking didn't, Nash growled. And if you're trying to imply that it's my fault, I'll kick your ass right off this cart. Oh no, I would never dream of blaming Nick's swordsmanship instructor for his lack of sword skills, I said with measured sarcasm. My skin is tougher than your words, Nash replied while crossing his arms. You won't rile me up. Any further than he already has? Matri asked innocently. Oh, so now it's a group effort, is it? Nash shouted. Our laughter rang out through the trees and almost masked the sound of wood crunching. Everyone except for Imlor stopped laughing and immediately turned towards the sound. Stop the cart, I said. Dibs, Nick shouted as he leapt from the cart. The hell does dibs mean? Nash asked as he jumped after Nick. I waited for the cart to come to a halt before climbing off. Nick and Nash were joined by Thunra, whom I hadn't even seen move. They were already about 50 yards ahead of me. Nick reached for his belt and then, remembering he doesn't have a sword, slowed to allow the other two to catch up. Before they could, though, two thick trees turned to splinters as a massive red and yellow beast crashed through them. It took a second to gain its bearings, and then roared a challenge at us, exposing rows of fangs and a tongue with a stinger on the tip. Its four eyes focused on Nick, and it stepped forward. What the hell is that thing? Nick shouted. Nash glanced at me, unsure of what we were looking at. Fair, considering we hadn't seen one before. The coloration was confusing, not designed to supply camouflage in a forest at all. But that's because it isn't designed to be camouflaged, nor is it supposed to be in a forest. Its domed skull covered in metallic spikes told me exactly what it was. It's a nalim, Thunra shouted. Get back! A nalim. A creature created in a twisted time of disastrous war, designed specifically to breach barricades and destroy defenders while drawing attention away from other attackers. The 3 claws on each limb were capable of cracking through stone like the sharpest of picks, and to add to its lethality, its creators had made it venomous. A terrible creature, and most unfortunate that we find one so close to the capital. We have to kill it. Rapes Dinutsak, Nick shouted, ignoring the sage advice that the brawler had given him. Wind slashed around us as his spell launched toward the nalim. It was a very powerful attempt, and I covered my eyes to protect them from the dust it kicked up. Despite the foolishness of the action, I found myself with a sense of pride for my pupil. Once the wind died down, though, Nick was on the ground with a very nasty-looking gash in his chest. Joni rushed past me to his aid. Knowing that Joni would keep Nick alive, I focused on the nalim. It wasn't undamaged, but its injury could be considered a minor flesh wound for one of its ilk. Its metallic skull glimmered in the sun, and 2 of the spikes had been shorn clean off. Ochre-colored blood oozed from the flesh, still clinging desperately to the remaining spikes. No. Wind Spear wouldn't work against such a foe. There's a specific class of spell one must cast to destroy a nalim, and it has to be a powerful one. Nah! The monster shook its head and stepped toward Nick and Joni, clearly angry at the injury it sustained. Nash and Thunra stepped in, slashing and punching respectively. The creature's attention turned, and it immediately began fighting them. I dropped my staff and raised both hands, feeling the arcane energy swell within my head. I focused on the glimmer of the nahalim's exposed skull and decided which spell to use. Nash and Thunra were in the way, though, dodging tooth, tongue, and claw. "Get out of the way!" I shouted. The 2 veteran fighters glanced at me for a millisecond before making a run for it. The nahalim looked at the 2 of them, unsure of which one to pursue. The hair on my arms stood on end as I began my visualization. Electrical energy, unbelievably powerful, moving at the speed of light toward the exposed metal. Klobsrolmitsak! My eyes felt as if they were on fire. My chest felt as if it had been kicked by a narce, and my arms burned as the lightning bolt traveled from me to the nahalim. The strike was instant, and giant monster collapsed to the ground. I grinned in satisfaction as my legs gave out and I fell to my knees. I gasped through the pain, letting it roll through me and keeping myself calm as it did so. It's just a little pain, no need to panic. "Yulk!" Nash shouted as he ran up to me. "Are you hurt?" "Yes, but it's fine." I waved him off. "Imlor's bolt is a hell of a spell, brother. How's Nick?" "He seems all right," Thunra answered as he approached. "Not even bleeding anymore. Joni looks like he's seen a ghost, though. You sure you're okay?" "Yes," I said, grabbing my staff and rising to my feet. "It's pain, not an injury. It's just one of the costs of the spell." "Huh?" they asked in unison. "Most spells just cost magic to cast, but certain spells cost a little something extra. A sort of curse to remind one to use the spell sparingly," I explained. "Never mind that, let's check on Nick." They eyed me warily as we walked over to Joni and Nick. Thunra was right, Joni looked terrified. His pale face looked up at us and he pointed to Nick. It spoke," he whispered. "What's that? Speak up." Thunra held a hand to his ear. He said, "It spoke." "By it, I'm assuming he means 10, I said. "The robot in Nick's head? Oh, the very same." "Oh, cool," Thunra grinned. Joni looked at us, his shock turning to incredulity and finally to anger. You knew the AI could use Nick to talk?" he demanded. "Oh, come on, Joni. Give him the benefit of the doubt," Thunra interjected. "The AI used Nick's body to fight before. Why wouldn't it be able to use his mouth to talk? Common sense." "Actually, Thunra, we did know," Nash said sheepishly. 10 talked to us after the fight with the altered human." "Oh, how come you didn't say nothing?" "We didn't quite get the chance, if you'll recall," I said with a grin. "And after that interaction, we thought it best to keep it between us. Joni, step aside, please. I need to ask 10 something before Nick wakes up." Joni looked offended but moved so that I could kneel down. He muttered a curse under his breath and crossed his arms. 10, can you hear me?" I asked. "Yes," Nick's voice said. "How is Nick doing?" "He's stable. Joni's healing was very helpful. He'll be waking up soon." "Good," I nodded. "Now then, why didn't you take control of his body like you did in the dungeon?" I caught 3 surprised expressions in my peripheral vision. "I tried," 10 said in a whining tone that surprised me. "He stopped me. I didn't even know he could do that. How? I asked. I do not know. He shouldn't have been able to. If that attack had been a little bit stronger, or a millimeter to the left, we'd have died. Did you try to take control before he cast Wind Spear or after? Nash asked. Before. It took half a second to fully detail the beast once I had a clear view of it, and I determined that Nick would not have been able to defeat it. I attempted to gain control but was unable to. He simply didn't go under. 10 explained. That's the second time I've experienced panic. Not enjoyable. Don't mean to be mean, buddy, but it's his body, Thunra interjected. Can't expect him to be willing to just hand it over at the drop of a hat. We could have died, 10 said softly. He's waking up now. Goodbye. We stared in uncomfortable silence at Nick's unconscious form. He looked peaceful, like a sleeping child, an illusion that was quickly shattered when he began coughing roughly and sat up. What happened? He asked. You nearly died, dumbass. Nash immediately answered. Next time an over 20 tells you to get back, you'd better fucking listen. Hey, Matri shouted from behind us. How's Nick? He's fine, Thunra called out as Matri and Yesith ran over. We checked the perimeter, Yesith said. Looks like we're clear. They looked at the corpse of the nalim, flames flickering where its eyes used to be. A lot more of its metallic endoskeleton was showing now. I couldn't help but be a little proud. Let's get back on the road, I said. Mac, you old fucker. I feel like it's been years. How've you been? A dwarf dressed head to toe in the finest fashions and walking with an exaggerated swagger that he knew annoyed those around him, strolled into my office. If I hadn't known who it was by his voice, I'd have known who it was by his ability to slip past Rezun. Leath Haln, a mer of business and a self-proclaimed double agent. A real double agent would never admit to being one, even under hours of torture. The reason for that is pretty simple. Admitting to being a spy is a surefire way to make certain that you die painfully and your family no longer has a place to live. In some nations, your family will actually face the same punishment that you do. Thankfully for Lyath, he's not actually a spy, simply an information broker and a secret messenger between the High Chiefdom of Kirkina and the Empire of Kalkadi. On occasion, he'll stumble upon a juicy bit of information while on his drunken benders and pass the word along. But he doesn't seem to favor one nation over the other. He takes some getting used to, but once you do, he's a good friend to have, able to switch gears from serious to silly in mere moments. Great to unwind with, and despite his annoying demeanor, he's somehow pleasant to be around. An enigma, to be sure. It's only been months, Leath, but I've been in good health. How about yourself? I replied with a grin. Ha, I see you've been counting the days then. I couldn't be better, he said, grabbing a seat. Met myself a sexy little elfie who's been keeping me entertained the last few days. About fucking time, too. I'd been on a desert-level dry spell, How's business? I interrupted, not wanting to hear about his debauchery. Straight to it then, he said with a measure of disappointment. Well, business has been right fucking dark as of late. Good, but dark. The Drow are definitely planning an attack, and there's something shitty about it. Shitty? I asked. Yes, absolutely shitty. Stinks to High Haven, it does. The last few times they've attacked, it's been unorganized and just generally amateurish. Their entire fucking strategy was to give a bunch of bastards sharpened sticks and shove them at the enemy. Yes, I recall, I said. The ill-conceived strategies of the inbred bastard king. What's different this time? They've got God's-damned formations. I narrowed my eyes at the dwarf. Has something happened to the inbred bastard? The death of Ymlofen would be disastrous for everyone neighboring the Drow. His incompetence and habitual political executions had kept the bloodthirsty culture of the Night Kingdom in check for half a century. The only things he's really good at is staying in power and killing those smart enough to help him be an effective king. He's uncannily good at the latter, almost as if he's deliberately trying. His family shrub was confusing to the point of being legendary. He is a third-generation royal, and I use that term loosely, whose grandparents were two sets of identical twins that had two children who then brought Lofen into this world, committing adultery in the process. Each and every one of these individuals had inbreeding in their direct lineage as well. Thankfully, Lofen was an only child, so the inbreeding stopped with him. Not that I've heard of, and that kind of news would leave a pretty big splash. Hell, there's bets on whether or not Lofen's immortal. How he's avoided what must be an entire fucking army of assassins at this point is beyond the ken of mortals. Regardless, someone else is definitely in charge this time around. Someone the shithead can't bully into being stupid. Any ideas on who that could possibly be? Nope. But whoever it is definitely has a pair, so that eliminates the princes. Lofen's 3 sons were smarter than their father, but deathly afraid of him. That's only natural, considering that he's had a total of 7 children. Nothing will make you scared of your father more than watching him publicly execute your older brothers and sisters. Their upbringing by the inbred bastard king had turned them into cowards. Unfortunately, intelligent cowards turn into very dangerous rulers, so only the drow were hoping for Lofen to die. Damn. Sounds like this fight with the drow is going to have to be taken seriously, I said, leaning back in my seat. Sure as shit, Leath said with a sympathetic smile. Want a drink to take your mind off it? He pulled out a flask and shook it. This particular flask was enchanted with a spell that caused it to refill itself with a very strong alcohol called Tok, a cursed thing, responsible for many forgotten nights and awkward mornings in my youth. I'm not about to go on a drunken bender when it's just after noon, Leath, I laughed. Plus, I've got an appointment soon. Oh, an appointment that you don't want to blow off, do tell. Well, have you heard any rumors about a human? You're pulling my sack, the thing they pulled out of a fucking dungeon in Nulava? That's the one, I grinned. It's registered as an adventurer and everything, so I've got an extra special job for it. It's on its way here right now. Well, fuck me running. Don't suppose you'd let an old pal sitting all quiet like, Come on, don't be like that. This might be my only chance to see it. Be a fucking pal, Ulermak. I guess I could be convinced to let you stay. I rubbed my chin theatrically. If you help convince Emperor Jack to accept my proposal. Eh? You trying to get married to Jack? Gods damn it, no. My proposal regarding that thrice-cursed mine. He wants to send his boys to mine it out for a steep cut of the ore. I want him to teach my boys how to mine more efficiently while giving him a more reasonable cut of the ore. Ah, shit. Had me all excited there for a second. Of course, it's about that fucking mine, though. Leath deflated. You know he's just about obsessed with the fucking thing. It'll be a hard sell, but he owes me some pretty big favors. I'll give it my best shot. That's all I can ask, I said. Fine. You are permitted to stay. As my old friend grinned in response to my decision, Rezun entered the room. Perfect timing, I smiled. What is it? Your appointment has arrived, he said, eyeing Leath warily. He's going to be sitting in... Of course, Rezun sighed. The human has arrived along with his adoptive brothers and the over-20s. The over-20s have been paid out, and Ysith awaits debriefing. Nulava has also sent a messenger for another matter. Leath's eyebrow raised, and I smiled slyly. Of course he wouldn't have heard anything about that. A living thing coming out of a dungeon is national news that travels like wildfire, but a strong monster within a dungeon is business as usual. Send them in, I ordered. I'll meet with the messenger afterwards. Yes, High Chief, Rezun said and left the room. Leath didn't even get the chance to interrogate me before Rezun returned accompanied by Ysith, 2 other orcs, and a strange, pale-looking creature with dark hair and round ears. I quickly surmised that this must be the human. They stood next to each other in front of my desk, and Rezun adopted a very formal pose. I braced myself for what was coming. High Chief Ulermak, son of Grashnya the Giant, savior of Kirkana, slayer of dragons, decimator of drow, conqueror of the Dragon's Jaw giants, blood ally of Bulasir, dear friend of the Empire of Kalkuti, and high commander of the Kirkana Adventurers Guild. I present to you Ysith Mulak, champion of Melruni, Nash and Yolk Alta of Clan Alta, and Nick Smith of Clan Alta. And so you have, I replied. You may continue your duties. Thank you, High Chief, Rezun said with a bow and left the room. I gazed at my visitors. The three orcs were very well behaved, standing straight and keeping their eyes trained just above my head. Their parents taught them well. I turned my gaze to the human, who was also standing straight but staring directly into my eyes as if it were my equal. This surprised me for a moment. "You must be Nick Smith, adopted into Clan Alta," I said. "Yes, sir." "Well, Nick Smith, you must not have high chiefs where you're from. I say this because it is remarkably rude to look one in the eye." I smiled slightly. "Unless, of course, you've known them for quite a long time. Have we met before?" "No, sir." Its eyes left mine. "Apologies, sir." "No apologies necessary as long as corrections are made. Thank you for observing our customs," I said. "Now, Yhisith, go ahead with your report." "Yes, High Chief," Yhisith said. She began explaining the events of their mission, and I struggled to keep a stoic expression. A lost language, artificially intelligent machines fused with flesh, the human fighting the monster while the over-20s struggled. The fact that it wasn't actually the human fighting, the threats made by Clan Alta in regards to the human's well-being, and finally the fact that the monster in the dungeon was a horrifically altered human. "By Bibby's balls," Leath muttered under his breath once the report concluded. "Indeed," I replied. "Thank you, Yhisith. You may go." Yhisith nodded, turned, and left the room. I looked at my remaining guests. Nick's face had the appearance of someone who had just received startling information but was trying to hide their concern. Yulk and Nash looked completely unperturbed. "Nash, Yulk," I began, "you really shouldn't be throwing your clan's weight around like that. You and I both know that the decision to avenge you would have been a controversial one, to say the least." "Yes, High Chief," Yulk said. "But if I may say something in our defense." I tried not to grin. "Go right ahead." "We weren't left with much choice. On our honor, we would have had to defend the boy against 4 over-20s. At least that's what we thought at the time." Yulk's cheeks twitched as he tried not to grin. "If they had killed us, which they likely would have, our mother would have called for their blood. I'm led to believe you personally know Yilda Alta." I couldn't help but wince at the mention of flesh-carver Yilda. Her spite is that of legends, and resisting her will is tantamount to trying to tell a waterfall to stop pouring. It was incredibly like her to randomly adopt a completely unknown creature that was discovered in a dungeon. "Yes, of course, she's done a lot for this chiefdom," I said. "Well then, it's a good thing you warned the adventurers off, I suppose." "Yilda Alta. Haven't seen her in years. How's she been, boys?" Leath asked. "She's been well," Nash answered. "Though she wanted me to tell you, High Chief, that she is displeased about the sudden summons of her sons, and she feels that she should get some time to spend with her boys in her golden years." "Oh, please," I laughed. "She's probably thrilled to be having you follow in your father's footsteps. Though I suppose I should make sparing use of you just in case she comes at me with a slipper." The two orcs were close to breaking down with laughter, and the human actually smiled. "Find a place to sit, I've got a mission for you," I said, pointing at the pile of cushions. The three of them grabbed a cushion, sat down, and looked at me expectantly. I couldn't help but smile when I noticed that Nick was still avoiding eye contact. It's a subtle shift from formal to informal, to be sure. "You can look at me now, Nick. When I offer you a seat, things become a lot less formal," I explained. "Oh, right," the boy stammered. "High Chief, I don't mean to be rude, but we do have our own mission to think of," Yulk said. "Oh?" I asked. "What would that be?" "We need to discover as much about Nick as possible. The language on the altar that Yhisith mentioned is likely Drakon. If we're to know what it says, we need to find a scholar who can read it." "Well, what a coincidence," I grinned. "Well, what a coincidence," I grinned. The three looked at me curiously, and Leath raised an eyebrow. "The most likely place to find someone who can read Drakon would be the kingdom of Bolisir, and that's exactly where I need you to go," I explained. "Bolisir? The elves?" Leath asked. "Yes, I need to send a request for reinforcements," I said. I had been worried that it would be seen as premature, but from what you just told me about the drow, it's best to act with haste. "If you wanted reinforcements, why not send a messenger to Kalkuti as well?" Because if I ask for troops from Regent Oakmore, he has to supply them, I replied. Part of our blood pact includes a mutual defense treaty. While we have close relations with the Empire of Calcuti, Emperor Jock is not honor-bound to our defense. With everything that's been happening over that damned mine, I'm certain he'll require a game of 50 messengers before sending aid. With respect, that's fucking narsh shit, Leith said. You and Jack may have your issues, but the people of Calcuti would have his head on a spike if it got out he didn't send troops to your defense. I looked at the dwarf incredulously. He met my stare and held it stubbornly, quite confident that he was correct. It's true that our people are close friends, even living among one another near the border. But could they possibly be close enough to rebel against their emperor for the sake of my people? I broke my gaze and rubbed my chin thoughtfully. All right, I finally said. I'll have you talk to Emperor Jack for me. Wait, Shit. Fine, fair enough. You got me. I grinned at the dwarf and turned back to the other three. Yulk was the only one who didn't look confused. Nick was doing a better job of hiding his confusion than Nash was, but that's probably because he has absolutely no idea what any of us are talking about. It's not particularly important that they understand the scope of this mission, but I suppose a little history lesson is in order. We have a bad history with the Kingdom of Night. Their king is a long-lived inbred bastard known as Yim Lofen. His family has ruled ever since the Drow won control of the region from the vampires, and every once in a while they try to conquer their neighbors. It's usually just a matter of fighting off a bunch of conscripted peasants until they run out of blood to spill. But it seems this time around things are going to be a little different. Nick looked concerned and he raised his hand unexpectedly. I stared at him, mouth agape, trying to figure out what the hell he was doing. Nash turned to look at the boy and was also surprised and confused. It took the human a second to realize the source of our confusion, and he slowly put his hand down and cleared his throat. Sorry, there's vampires? Like bloodsuckers that turn other people into vampires? He asked. Burn up in the sun, afraid of garlic and crow, holy symbols? No, I stammered. There are vampires and they do drink blood, but most aren't harmed by the sun and none of them are harmed by holy symbols. I don't know what garlic is, so they might be afraid of it. Can you kill them by driving a stake through their heart? He asked. I don't know how you would even begin to shove a stake through someone's heart, but no, they're able to quickly regenerate. You need to inhibit their movement by removing their head and then incinerate them, I answered. Easier said than done, though. They're incredibly fast and strong. Some of them can turn people into vampires, too, Leith added. You forgot that bit. I looked at him and he grinned at me. He was enjoying how thrown off I was by this interruption. I cleared my throat. Well, that's enough about the vampires. They're hardly relevant. It's not as if they're going to be attacking alongside the Drow. I trailed off. Someone who wouldn't care about Lofen's opinions and want to conquer new lands that he would have difficulty controlling. Could the vampires be making a power play in the Night Kingdom? I looked at Leith and his expression told me he had caught on to my line of thinking. Lofen's newest general might be a vampire. But how? Listen, I said, grabbing a letter from my desk. Your mission is to get to the Kingdom of Bolasir as fast as possible and deliver this letter to Regent Oakmore. You'll have to take the main road. The adventurer's path has been blocked by a rock slide and we're having difficulty getting it cleared. Once you deliver the letter, you're free from your obligations to me, and may return for your payment at your convenience. What's the pay going to be? Yulk asked. 3 gold each, 1 paid up front for travel costs, I replied. See raison for that? Leith let out a low whistle. That's a lot of money for delivering a message. I'll need to raise my rates. Don't you dare, I growled playfully. I'm paying them extra because I'm being selfish in giving them this job. Now you 3, do you understand the task? Yes, High Chief, they said in unison. Good, here, I said, handing the letter to Yulk. This should go without saying, but don't open it. If you break the seal, Regent Oakmore might be able to squirm out of his obligations. Not that he would, but it's better not to tempt fate. Understood, the sorcerer said, putting the letter in his robe. I wanted to have a longer conversation, but something has come up. I explained. Come see me after you finish your task and collect your payment. I waved at them to go, and they did. Once the door closed, I turned to my dwarven confidant. Do you think the reason that the drow have suddenly become organized is due to a vampire? I asked. I mean, it makes sense, but at the same time it really fucking doesn't, he answered. Drow can't become vampires, right? That's how they were able to boot the suckers out in the first place, isn't it? Well, a vampire can't convert a drow, but what happens if they were to breed? Oof. A half-drow, half-vamp would be a weak little thing. Not exactly the kind of strength that would inspire a military. No, but a weakling would be the exact type of drow that King Nolen would hand-pick to lead his armies. He doesn't like strong generals because they become a threat to his dominance, I pointed out. Shit. If he didn't know it was a vampire and it was born to nobility, it would be a shoo-in. So what? We've got an imminent vampiric coup in the Night Kingdom? No. They'd need a place to gather their strength before making a move against Nolen, preferably somewhere that the king would have difficulty exerting influence over, and a place with plenty of potential vampire spawn, like the High Chiefdom of Kirkina, for instance. Why would they go about it in such a weird way, though? Wouldn't it make more sense to just start turning farmers on their borders? No. If you're a vampire and you want to create enough vampires to make an army, you need control over the populace. You would need to be a noble king governor or a conquering general, I said. I need you to go to Emperor Jack and let him know about this possibility and request his aid. Oh, and don't forget about that damned mine. Of course, Lieth laughed as he stood up. I'll get his ass in gear one way or another. See you later. Have a good journey. As Lieth left my office, Rezun entered. I raised my eyebrow at him. What is it? I asked. The messenger that arrived with the human, he explained. Do you want me to send him in? Another Nulovan messenger, eh? I asked. What does he want? I'm sure he can tell you that himself, High Chief. Rezun treated me to a withering glare. I chuckled. All right. Send him in. Rezun professionally rolled his eyes at my antics and left the room, soon returning with the messenger in question. High Chief Ulermak, son of Grashknall the Ghee, he began. Enough, I interrupted. What is it, messenger? Rezun looked annoyed as the messenger straightened and stared above my head. He took a moment to gather his nerve. High Chief Ulermak, Chief Gluhern of Nulava, would like to request that Nulava be formally recognized as a village. It now meets the population and commerce requirements. It wasn't already? I jokingly asked. No, High Chief, Rezun said flatly, though Chief Gluhern's been doing his best to have it considered as such. However, at the moment it is considered a settlement and isn't eligible for the benefits of being a village. Well, it's not exactly open to attack, so they must be after the business benefits. I doubt they'd say no to a garrison of troops, High Chief. True enough, I sighed. Of course they wouldn't say no to a garrison. The soldiers would be getting money from Kirkina and spending it in Nulava. A drop in the bucket for us, but one hell of a boon for an up-and-coming village. Nuleva had already grown pretty rapidly, and becoming a village would likely make it grow even faster. Gluhern's done a hell of a job. Fine. Return to Chief Gluhern and tell him Nulava is now a village, I said. Let him know the garrison will have to wait until the drow are dealt with. Yes, High Chief. Rezun guided the messenger out of my office, and I was once again left alone with my thoughts and my mountain of paperwork. The human had looked interesting, shaped like a short elf, but it was missing the tinge of green in its skin and eyes, and its ears were round. Those eyes were strange, piercing and blue, a stark contrast to its black hair, a shade of blue I'd never seen in eyes before. It's obvious that it's from a foreign land. Perhaps I'll be able to ask it about that upon its return. I put the human from my mind and set about the task of filling out the paperwork that surrounded me. All of it was boring. Things like requisition forms that I really should be delegating, approvals and denials for proposals, and tax stuff. There were some seemingly exciting papers like the disposition of soldiers and training permissions and things of that nature. Unfortunately, these only sound exciting until you have to be the one to fill them out. It was rare that I could simply sign something and be done with it. I yawned as I set a large stack of papers I'd just completed in my done pile. I smiled in satisfaction at the dent I had made, and Rayzun entered the room holding a stack twice the size of the one I'd just completed. "What the hell is this?" I demanded as he set the stack on my to-be-done pile. "These are the forms to officially make Nulava a village," he replied. "There's the recognition forms, tax forms, requests for updates to the various maps of the High Chiefdom, and of course congratulatory letters to the village leaders. So, what you're saying is that I made more work for myself by being benevolent to the people of Nulava." "Yes, High Chief," Rayzun said with a malicious smile. "No good deed goes unpunished. Damn it,